Let's analyze the situation, investigate the motivation, and utilize the inspiration and discover the soul of us. The soul of us.
Live. What's going on? All right, here we go. We are live. Say, let's go ahead. Let them come on in. Let them come on in. Yeah. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Soul of Us, episode 5. Episode 5. Yes. Racism. We can't heal if we don't reveal. Racism. We can't heal if we don't reveal. Welcome. Come on in, y'all. Come on in. We're going to get started in a few minutes, a few seconds. All right. Populate. Come on. Wait for somebody to start. Come on in. How y'all doing? How y'all doing? Good evening. Good evening. Soul of Us podcast, episode 5. Episode 5. All right. So, for those who have been watching the podcast weekly, you know that we've been discussing different topics as it relates to our emotional wellness or our social emotional learning. So, episode 1 just called the state of emergency, and talking about our emotional wellness and how we interact with each other, and what's going on in our society. What's the state of mental health? What's the state of emotional wellness? Episode 2 was trauma. We talked about trauma and how it impacts you on a personal level, a physical level, a mental level. We defined trauma. Episode 3, we talked about perception, how perception is, one of the main things that defines us and defines our actions, and how perception we can be influenced. Our perception can be influenced by society, and that can impact our mental health, impact our emotional wellness. So we talked about our perception, our attitude, how it determines our altitude. And in episode 4, we talked about communication and how that relates. So I always give a little backdrop so people who are on the live can go back and see what we got, what information's out there for the Soul of Us podcast. So we're gonna go ahead and get started this week. Episode 5, Soul of Us. Welcome. Yes. Good evening, everyone. Hope everybody had a great week. Come on in and join us. Now, so the topic this week is racism. You can't heal if you don't reveal. So you can't heal if you don't reveal. So racism. When we think about racism, what's the first thing come to mind? First thing that come to mind as it relates to, just thinking about what racism is. Like, so for me, when I think about racism, I think about, slavery. I think about civil rights. I think about, different words that shouldn't be said. I just think about how people who aren't white get treated, so to speak. And it's not just black people. It's anybody who is not of the status quo. I think of racism. I think of being held back. I think of not having access to resources. When I think of racism, I think of being made to feel like you're less than, like you don't belong. When I think of racism, it's very dynamic. It's very deep, and we're gonna get deep this episode. So I just want to, I wanted to take that time to ponder. I thought about it. Did you? Did you think about what racism is? And do you really know what racism is? Have you ever thought about it? Or is it just something that you hear and you just going through life, whatever happens, you take it and you keep it moving, right? So this episode, I'm going to define racism for you. And we're going to talk about racism as it relates to our emotional wellness and how to repair from that damage, right? So a lot of times people think that prejudice is racism. And prejudice is just another form of interacting with society, meaning it's a form of your bias. You could have prejudice and not be racist, right? You can have prejudice anytime you um, have a certain preference towards something, right? That could be considered a prejudice towards it. So, if you don't like being in places where loud people are, or you don't like being places where, you know, it's not clean or things aren't healthy, that could be considered a bias. You're biased against things that aren't clean. You have a prejudice against things that aren't clean. So prejudice is more like the way you think, is your perception against something. Now when you start to act on your prejudice, right? When you start to act on your prejudice and it impacts other people and their livelihoods and their access to things, then we can get into the realm of racism. So if you have a prejudice against people or something and you seek to hold it back, destroy it, that is when we start to get into what real racism looks like. So again, when I thought about racism, I started thinking about slavery. We know the impact of slavery was very traumatic. Same thing with Jim Crow. Same thing with the civil rights movement as a whole. Mass incarceration. All of these different things, right? You hear these terms, police brutality, being someone of color is very traumatic in the sense of your emotions are constantly being attacked, so to speak. Your emotions are constantly being, up and down because, the images that we see, the information that we receive evokes emotional responses. Now, uh, whether or not you actually acknowledge your emotional response or you've normalized your emotional response, these things that we see and take and hear, they evoke an emotional response. So we're here today to define what is that is causing our emotional response so we can see, what are we responding to? What are we responding to? Are we just responding to the fact that somebody used the N-word? Are you responding to the fact that you don't have access to something? Are you responding to the fact that you're being treated like you don't belong? Like, what are we responding to when we hear racism? Let's define it. Okay. So now I'm gonna use some words, but I'm gonna try to be as simple as possible. So just follow me, follow me, follow me. Appreciate you. So racism. This is a definition that I came across a few years ago. It's a very dynamic definition. So racism in itself is the systematic subjugation of one social group by a more powerful social group for the social, economic, and political benefit of the more powerful social group. So let's stick right there. So again, it says a systemic subjugation. So racism is systemic subjugation of one social group by a more powerful social group for the social, economic, and political benefit of the more powerful social group. So, what does that mean? Before we just keep going, what does that mean? Does that mean that racism is the ability to put laws in effect that affect one race more than another? Sounds like it. Is that denying access to financial resources? One social group can get access, Another social group can't get access, even though they may be of the same status, right? So when we think of racism, when we think of this, this subjugation, right? Being put in a place and made to feel a certain way. But what we just read is saying that the one group creates the systemic subjugation in order to have economic, social, what else? It says economic, political, and social benefits. So when we start to define racism, right, we said it could be one group who has more wealth or a system, you know, and yes, just like in Tennessee, right? You know, Tennessee just passed the bill where it's the critical race theory bill, where you're not allowed to speak about certain things when it comes to race. So if it's bringing up bias, if it's speaking about white supremacy, it's very clear cut that this bill does not want um, black history or black plight to be discussed in a social education setting. So what that means, right? How the bill in Tennessee came about is a mother of a child wrote a representative, a House of Rep, and wrote to one of our state representatives. And what it was said in the note was that her child had went to school and was hearing about white privilege, and it left her depressed and suicidal. So the note that she sent said that her child, due to her hearing about white supremacy and white privilege, left her depressed and suicidal. So the senator here in Tennessee drew up the bill saying that this should not be happening to white kids. It's not fair that they need to be felt, to be held accountable for something that they weren't there to be held accountable, or to be told that it's their fault that their ancestors did these things. So again, I'm not for traumatizing anyone, but I am for telling the truth. Because again, we're talking about how racism impacts our emotional wellness. So if on one side you have a kid who is, of the status quo and is being told how the status quo subjugates, like we said, systemically, like from the system. That child is being told how the system, right, what is ran by people who look like them, how they've done certain people. But instead of us teaching this child how to empathize, how to have compassion towards the information that you're hearing, we're teaching our children to take defense. We're teaching our children to basically take it as a as harmful information, meaning we're in a state of being where if you tell the truth, right, it's going to be harmful to a certain person. And this person is, if it hurts them, then, they'll make it seem like that you're crazy for even telling the truth because they're hurt from the truth that you spoke. So we got to look at it. In Tennessee, one child's emotion is more important than another child's emotion, right? So that's what we're saying. And that's how racism, the foundation of racism, has been on has been built upon emotional harm. So gaslighting, telling a person that they're less than, that they're beast in the field, that they're not natural human beings, or they got an extra chromosome, or you know any of these types of terms can leave emotional weight. And then when you add physical subjugation, right? Because along with the state of Tennessee passing a bill to even further subjugate people of color. Why? Because one race's emotions are more important than another race's emotions, which isn't fair. And we know life isn't fair, but we're supposed to be sound, emotionally sound people with a moral compass. So if you have a moral compass, you can't say that you are a good person if you're not able to hear other people's opinions, feelings, and acknowledge them in a genuine and authentic way, right? So we got real politicians who do not acknowledge our emotions, who do not acknowledge our plight, our experience. What's more important is their experience, how they see it, how they feel. So they can create a bill that says, no, we don't want to talk about that in our schools. If you want to talk about it at home, not in our schools. And this is something that's been going on for a long time, creating reality for people of color, shaping reality through the system for people who are not the status quo, right? So, and this is a very deep and this is a very challenging topic, challenging subject, because it's not okay. But we have to, again, check our own emotions as people of color, or people who are not the status quo. We have to check our emotions daily. Every time you look at the TV, we got to check our emotions. Every time we go somewhere and, instead of being able to be ourselves, we have to fit into the ideal of what an acceptable me looks like. Even if that's not who I feel like I am, I still have to. These things weigh on our emotions. They weigh on us, which cause us to have certain behaviors where now, because we've been told something so long, we've been subjugated for so long, we start to believe the lie. Maybe I am worthless. Maybe I am less than. Maybe I don't deserve the finer things in life. Oh, I won't even work for it. I'll just accept what's already given to me. This is the level of emotional wellness, right? When it comes to victims of severe racism, victims of intertransgenerational racism, where you've seen your mother have to go work for someone for little to nothing and be treated like they're not a human being. Or the fact that you find out that there's a Bible, right? That was a slave Bible. And in that Bible, they took out all of the chapters, or they redacted chapters that could inspire you to stand tall and to fight for yourself, right? Anything that could galvanize you emotionally, fill your spirit, but they filled it with, or left in, the things that made you obedient, made you subservient, made you question yourself. And they preach that. This is what we're talking about when we start talking about racism and the ability to change a person's way of thinking through subjugating them, through, treating them a certain type of way. So let's continue on this journey. And I know this is heavy, but we got to talk about it. We got to talk about it. And this is just part one, right? So when we start talking about that social group, subjugating systematically for social, economic, and political benefit, right? And we talked about it, social benefit, meaning they may benefit from all trends, anything that's happening, like we did, but like back in the day when you used to hear you know, uh, this person invented something, but they actually stole it from someone else, but the other person wasn't even able to file for a patent or able to get the recognition because of their skin color or because of where they're from, right? So we've heard these things of, the harm, taking from others for your own benefit and not giving them the credit, or just keeping other people down economically so you can benefit off their backs, or politically so that, you can have the country shaped the way you want it to be, right? So some of these conditions look like, right, the ability of the oppressor and racism to define reality. And we just talked about that, right? With the slave Bible, that's defining reality. With the critical race bill, that's defining reality. That's saying that we're going to teach you about what we think is important from history. We're going to show you what we think is important, for you to learn, to shape your mind, to shape who you are as a person, right? But we're not going to show you who you are. We're not going to show you actual truth. We're going to show you the perception of life that we want you to believe. So, right, when you growing up, did you hear about anything other than the European race? Did we get taught about Asian history? Did we get taught about African history? Did we get taught about, you know, South American history? No. For me growing up, history started in Europe and ended in Europe. So we learned about the medieval times, and we learned about slavery, and, you know, we learned about, the industrial age, but everything pointed to one race. And that's defining reality. Because when you don't have representation or books that mirror you, how do you learn about you? How do you develop an emotional, social perspective of yourself that's healthy? Do you? Or do you start to believe the hype? So that's what we're talking about. One way that racism impacts our emotional reality, our emotional health, is that the oppressor group can define our reality, right? The second thing, another way it impacts us on an emotional level. And this is the trauma, guys. We're talking about the trauma because once we go through this, we then have to, how do we heal? Where do we go from here? Right? So the next thing after we saying defining the reality for a certain group and how that impacts them. That also, another way it impacts us is that through them defining our reality, we start to internalize those negative messages about us. And we end up cooperating with the message and the oppressor. Now, think about that. Do we see that? Are we in a state of emergency emotionally? Do we believe in ourselves? Do we see ourselves achieving as a whole, not individually, as a whole, as a race? Do we have a high sense of self-esteem when we look at ourselves? Do we appreciate who we are, where we come from throughout time and space? I don't think so. I don't think we do as a whole. We have individuals that do, and when they do, they're looked at a certain way. They could be called un-American. They could be called, rebellious, evil, anything that comes against the status quo and things that, you rocking the boat, you're going to be called out for rocking the boat. So these are things that are harming us on an emotional level. And just because you may be moving throughout your life and your day like everything's normal doesn't mean everything's normal. See, we've normalized a lot of these behaviors. We've normalized a lot of these thoughts and actions as okay because, we've been beat down into submission. But, or lack of education, lack of understanding. So, we have to educate ourselves. We have to educate ourselves. We have to educate ourselves. And we have to keep the information in the forefront because we see it every day with the defining of our reality, telling us what we can think, how to think, what to perceive. Then we see the adverse effect of that, where we start to internalize those beliefs of others, where we start to see ourselves, our hair isn't good, our skin isn't good, the way we live isn't good. We start to pretend and try to be other people and not enjoy and validate ourselves. We have to really understand these things. So, another thing that harms us on an emotional level, like the damage. The damage. What is racism? We're defining racism and how it impacts us on an emotional level. So, the next one is physical harm. Physical harm, genocide, harassment, discrimination, right? Institutionalized, being institutionalized, right? So all of these things are done to keep it going, to keep it going. So I'll beat you into submission. I'll lock up a lot of you guys, put you in prison, and keep you there for a long time. Or I'll create a propaganda campaign, demonizing you, questioning your existence. Why are you here? You should be treated like this. This is where we start to talk about the hoses being brought out, the dogs. We start to talk about genocide on a big level, whether it's slavery, whether it's the Holocaust, whether it's, war. Racism is impacting us on a major level emotionally because our moral compasses are changing. Now, instead of leading with love, racism has created a society where we'll move based on the perceptions that society wants us to have. Like watching the movie Crash, where it's based on a movie about stereotypes, where we have a society that moves and grooves on stereotypes. Not authentic experience or how, their genuine experience was, turned out. No, I'm going to listen to what they're saying about you. I believe what they're saying. Even if I have no truth, even if I know it not to be true, racism is that strong that it defines reality, right? And it's reinforced through physical domination, whether that's discrimination, whether that's harassment, whether that's beating you, whether that's incarcerating you, whether that's keeping you down, right? So we got to understand what's happening. What's happening? Why are we still going through these things? And in my opinion, it's because it's the lack of education and understanding. What's being taught in homes is what's perpetuating this. So we have children being taught on both sides the wrong things. Either they're being taught the stereotype or they're being shown that that stereotype is real. It's all over us. It's all over us. So let's continue. So this is, like I said, members of both oppressor and the target group. I just said it on both sides, whether you are the one being affected or you are the one affecting, impacting. Both sides, right? They are socialized to play their role. Play our role. Play our role. So whether that's being the oppressor and continuing the divide, keeping up the conversation that you are less than, that you are an animal, that you don't deserve the quality of life that I deserve. That's what's being taught generation to generation on one side, to play that role. And on the other side, it's being taught that, you know, uh, they're better than us, will never have what they have, crabs in the barrel mentality, lack of emotional wellness or emotional literacy, being able to even connect with each other, not anyone else. The lack of being able to connect with each other to build, positive communities, to build positive lives. We are divided amongst ourselves. The target group is divided amongst itself. The oppressor group doesn't even have to, literally play their role as hard anymore. We're playing our role to the T because we have been emotionally impacted, morally injured. And through that moral injury, it's created a behavior. It's created a personality that we've adopted, and we operate out of that trauma. We operate out of that harm. And it's through lack of understanding. We are hurt people just going through life, not telling the truth or standing on the truth or, fighting for what's right. We're just trying to get a dollar. We're just trying to live happy. We're just trying to, just get by. But that's not emotionally well. It's not emotionally healthy. It's not socially healthy. And that's why we see a lot of mental illness on both sides, because racism impacts the oppressor just like it impacts the victim. Narcissism, selfishness, these things impact your emotional wellness. They impact your integrity. They impact, your relations, how your life will turn out. So just because you may have a lot of money or you have a house, if you're racist, you're causing negative energy. So you're impacted by that as well. And we see that. We see the storming of the Capitol, people dying at the hands of racism. You see what I'm saying? People dying at the hands of racism. Like, that's how much this is a problem, because it's changed the way people interact with the world, and they don't interact in a rational way. They interact in an emotionally unhealthy, emotionally unfit way. So it makes sense to go sacrifice your life for a lie. It makes sense to go sacrifice your life for, propaganda and people who, say that this is the truth, but it's not. And when you get the truth, you fight the truth. You say that's the lie. You stand up against it. That's why we have to educate ourselves. We have to continually put the information out there, because if we're going to heal, we have to reveal. And that's the name of the episode. If we're going to heal, we have to reveal. We cannot think that things are going to happen and we're just going to move forward miraculously, magically. Everything's going to get better. We went through 400 years of slavery. We went through Jim Crow, civil rights, the Holocaust, mass incarceration. People, whether you were the victim or not, this impacted you. We are still dealing with years of emotional baggage. Years, decades, centuries of emotional baggage. We have to reveal these things and tell the whole truth, nothing but the truth, in order for us to live a positive life, in order for us to actualize ourselves as a race, the human race, right? We have to have that compassion, that empathy. We have to be humane. But it starts with us as individuals taking on the task of becoming emotionally healthy, emotionally literate, understanding your own feelings, understanding how things impact you. So then you can be advocates for others. You know right from wrong, and you're willing to stand up against that. So I wanted to come on here and just define racism, put it out there, because a lot of people think racism is just, you know, bigotry, using words, calling people a certain name. You know, that's what they think it is. But racism is so much more, so much more. And you see that it's so much more in the way that we behave emotionally, the way that what we accept, what is done. You know, we have to wake up and smell the coffee, the roses, whatever. Like, going through life numb is not healthy. Going through life pretending is not healthy. Going through life letting things just happen to you is not healthy. We have to become soldiers for ourselves, meaning standing up for what you believe in, standing up against mistreatment, not normalizing bad behavior, educating yourself, wanting more from life, defining your goals and what that looks like, and striving to attain it. But today, how can you help heal the human race from racism? Have you healed? Are you healing? Can we heal? I believe we can. I believe that it starts with us becoming emotionally literate, having good social emotional learning skills, becoming self-aware, socially aware, being able to control ourselves, relationship build in a positive way, and make good decisions. If we can get all of us on the same page with that, that being how we raise our kids, how we measure adulthood, how we hold each other accountable, if we can get to that page, I think we can start to heal. Because through self-awareness and social awareness, you're going to tell the truth. You're going to hold yourself accountable. And then we can build better relations by making better decisions. And why we can do that is because we can control ourselves. We're no longer perpetuating that bias, that ugliness, whether it's the oppressor or the victim. We're no longer. We are perpetuating humanity, humaneness, love, care. We're perpetuating the good things, the finer things in life. We no longer have to sit here and be on opposite sides of the street, or no longer have to look at you like, you're different from me. We are more the same than we are different. And until we can understand that, we're going to impact each other in the worst ways. And we're going to keep that baggage because we don't know how to heal, because we're not telling the truth. We're not revealing what's going on. So we're not going to be here all night tonight. We're going to come back and talk about this subject. I just wanted to get on here and let's just define racism and then how it impacts us on an emotional level. And we see it: depression, anxiety, social anxiety, personality disorders, conduct disorders, oppositional defiance. All of these things are products of racism, right? Ignorance, All of these things. And until we start to define it in a truthful, authentic way, where one person can take the hurt, the constructive criticism, the other person can understand that what they're saying is heavy. That even though I'm hurt, this person is still a human. And that in this tough conversation, I still need to be empathetic. And it goes both ways. So we're going to come back, another episode, talk about from a larger scale, how do we heal? What those programs look like? What does racial socialization look like? Meaning, how do you prepare people who aren't the status quo to live in a society that says that if you aren't the status quo, you're not, you're second best, second class citizen? How do we start to heal? So there's programs, there's different things that we can do to uplift our, self-esteem and the way we see each other, the way we look at each other. But it starts with having that conversation. So I want you guys to have a great weekend. And while you're on this weekend, think about racism and how it impacts you. Whether it was the bill that was passed in Tennessee, whether it's knowing that your people has been oppressed for a long time, knowing that you don't have access, how does that impact you? What does that do to you as an individual? Right? Like, then when you start to have that conversation of what can be done, how can we change that? But if you don't know what's happening, you're not going to do anything to change it. So don't listen to what other people are saying about society. Use your own lenses. Use your heart. Use your mind. Use your soul. Take in the information. Open up your heart to feel how other people feel. See their pain, right? And if you can relate, if you are able to integrate those feelings and act in a socially healthy way, that's amazing. And we need you to do that. If not, let's start at square one. How did you become this way? Why are you this way? What are some techniques, some skills to help you become a better person and not fit into the schema of racism? Whether you are the oppressor or the victim who is playing their role to a T. Let's wake up, because either side, it's impacting us in a major way. Our emotional health, our mental health, our physical health, all of these things are tied together. So let's start to learn socially, emotionally, what needs to be done. So again, we can start to be self-aware, socially aware, be able to regulate ourselves, make good decisions, and build better relations. So this is All of Us Podcast, episode 5, racism and how it impacts our emotional wellness. So now, I know this was a lot, but take a step back, breathe. Think of a moment in time where either you were racist or you witnessed or received racism, and how did it make you feel? Did you feel like you were in power, or did you feel powerless? And why? Let's start to understand the dynamic that's going on around us so that we can advocate for the truth, for positivity, right? So we can live in an emotionally sound world where mental health isn't something that's just taboo, doesn't get talked about, but is promoted, and positive mental health, positive interaction. So with that being said, I know this was a heavy topic, and we're going to address it even more later on down the line. We just need to start the conversation, keep that conversation going. I'm here for you guys. If you ever want to talk, reach out. Your favorite mental health coach. We can get through this. We can get through this. We didn't got this far, meaning what don't kill us make us stronger. But we have to learn, and we have to be willing to change. We have to be open. So you guys have a great weekend. Love y'all. It's been an experience. I'm going to go relax because this is a heavy topic, being a person of color myself. And even talking to you guys as a professional, it evokes emotions within me. And I have to be cognizant. I have to be aware of those things. And when I do, I have to regulate myself. So again, everybody, take a step back. Ask yourself some of the questions we talked about today. Who are you within this? Because you are emotionally impacted. But are you numb? Are you hurt? Are you the abuser? What are you? Let's open our eyes and let's work together. Let's have a tough conversation. So you guys have a great weekend again. Peace and blessings. Signing out. Your favorite mental health coach.